I had a conversation with a good friend of mine about his Rocket League journey, and over a really long period of time, he tried to climb the ranks, but it didn't work out. And during that whole time, he never reached out to me once. I asked him why, and his response is kind of the point of this video. I'm going to talk about that conversation and how it affects so many players, limiting their capacity and why they aren't successful. And at the very end, I'll give you a free framework that has helped me through this year, particularly because it's been a very hard year for me, but hopefully it helps you. And the big theme of this is that no one cares, just win, because until you win, effort goes unnoticed. You just have to get used to it. And it's the way of the world. I remember I asked him, hey, do you mind if I make a piece of content about this? And he said, sure, but what about our long conversation? I said, you mentioned something interesting. If I'm going to fail, I'd rather it be on me. And he replied, I needed to have that happen to realize that I can't do it on my own. Otherwise, it'd be easy to put that blame on somebody else. And I responded, how could you put blame on someone else? He said, well, saying things like, I failed because I used someone else's system, or I failed because my teammate didn't rotate properly, or I failed because they missed an open net. And they're all basically just cop-outs when your mind gets kind of weak, right? They're kind of like excuses, but I've witnessed this happen too many times. I said fault's funny because it doesn't matter. No one thinks to themselves, hey, that worked out really well for him. I wonder whose fault it is. We only think fault in the negative. We don't think faults in the positive, right? I bring this up to him and he says, I have a visceral understanding of the fact that I need better systems, better leverage, and better teammates to make that next chapter happen. So I have to stop hiding. In thinking about this, I realized that no one asks whose fault it is when it works. And the reality is that 2 years ago from now, when you think about the Rocket League Championship Series or, the players who have hit these records, no one's like, hey, that guy got really good teammates, or it was laggy that day. No one remembers, they just remember who won. And honestly, this is a really interesting thought line I wanted to dive into because my friend did something in the competitive Rocket League space. I reached out and I asked, why didn't you ask me for help? His response was that he wanted the failure to be on his own if he was going to fail. And it was such a contrast to how I've seen the world that I thought it was worth making this video. For any of you who have this view, I think it does you a tremendous disservice because my perspective has always been, it will always be my fault and no one will care, who I got help from. They'll just know whether I won or lost, period. The background on my phone is 2 words, just win. That's it. And when I win, when I think about that, it's like no one cares. No one's going to ask how many people you got help from before you failed. They just know whether you failed or not. And it's ridiculous to live life this way because the real issue underneath is actually ego. And it's not being able to say, I don't know, please help. Many people would rather maintain their egos and fail than win. And a lot of beginners are stuck there. They're actually stuck in their own pride. They don't reach out for help. They don't consume content because they think that they're smart enough. And this is something that's really common among people who identify as being intelligent. And that's why I think humility is such an important part of getting to where you want to go. You have to be able to say, I don't know. You have to be able to say, I failed, or I couldn't figure it out. And if you can't do that because you maintain a certain image to the people around you, like being the smart guy or always good at the game, and then you see somebody else who wasn't as good suddenly succeed, 9 times out of 10, it's because they're okay being like, I don't know. Can someone help me? But if you're the smart one, at least amongst your peers, you're not willing to do that because you have to humble yourself. The work has to be done. The learning has to happen. Question is, what mindset do I need to have that? What maximizes the likelihood that I will learn faster than other people? Humility is part of that mindset. And you have to be humble enough to listen, to ask, and you can learn anything you want as long as you're willing to look dumb in front of other people for an extended period of time. I think the most underrated skill in Rocket League, in my opinion, is being willing to look stupid. One of the surest ways to never succeed is to avoid looking dumb, to avoid failing. What's really interesting is that risk is guaranteed. People have this huge misconception about how life works. They want to avoid risk, but all great things come with risk. If you put an idea out there, you risk ridicule. If you want to climb the ranks, you risk failure. If you want to improve, you risk looking bad. All of these things have joy and suffering intertwined. And we want the side without the other. We want the sunny days without the rainy days, but it's just weather. The only way you can avoid that is by never going outside. But if you never go outside, you miss out on life. So missing out on risk is the same as missing out on growth. The fear you feel in ranked, that pressure before a promotion game, that's the weather. And you either play in it or you stay inside watching others pass you. And if you risk nothing, you become nothing. If you don't queue, you literally can't win. And if you don't challenge, you don't improve. If you never take the shot, you never score. Now, here's the thing most people get wrong, especially in the lower ranks. They think they have nothing to lose. But almost everyone feels like they do. And that thing that they think they're protecting, it's usually imaginary. Social standing, ego, looking smart in front of their friend group, being the good one at Rocket League in their friend circle, or being the one who was supposed to hit Grand Champ first, and so they play scared. They don't try new mechanics. They avoid taking risks. They don't ask for coaching. Why? Because they don't want to be seen as the one who needed help. But reality is that image you are clinging to, that status, that reputation you're trying to protect, it's the exact thing that's holding you back. And I've coached so many players who had the potential to hit Grand Champ, but never made it, not because they weren't skilled, but because they refused to let go of that fake status they had built up for themselves. And that's why I believe this so deeply. Your identity has to shift. You can't keep thinking of yourself as the one who's already good. You have to reframe it. Who you are is what you do, not what people think of you, not how many hours you have, not how good you were in season 10. It's your actions, your behaviors, your progression. That's the stuff that's real. Question is, when things get hard, when you lose 5 in a row, what do? That's who you are. It's not, the screenshot of your peak MMR, not the title under your name, what you do when it matters. That's who you are. And if you root your identity in action, in behavior, in learning, then it becomes anti-fragile. It doesn't matter, when you get demoted, it doesn't collapse, when you miss an open net, it bends, it adjusts, and it gets stronger. I say this because I've been through it. I've had seasons that completely broke me. I've had rank sessions that made me question whether I actually understood the game inherently. And when I look back, the only thing that helped me recover was shifting my focus from what others thought to what I did. Did I queue up again? Did I review the replay? Did I fix the mistake? That's the only identity worth having. So let me give you a real example. When I started getting serious about Rocket League, I joined a really high-level coaching Discord, and I wasn't high ranked yet. I didn't have titles. I didn't have clout. I was just a dude trying to get better. And you know what I did? I paid for a coaching session before I even hit champ. I knew I didn't know enough. I knew I had blind spots, so I paid to learn from players who had already done what I was trying to do. And it saved me years of struggle, and I learned things that most people don't figure out until they've wasted hundreds of hours. Stuff about rotation, spacing, decision making, stuff that no training pack will teach you. And it's actually funny because people look at where I am now and think, I just got it. No, I asked, I got help, I studied, I watched better players. I learned from every teammate, every coach, every mistake, and the only reason I could do that was because I didn't care if I looked dumb, because I'd rather be bad and learning than average and stuck. And That's what most people are, stuck in a fake sense of competence, afraid to ask questions, afraid to admit that they don't understand, and that's why they plateau. That's why they bounce around the same rank for a year, not because they don't want to improve, but simply because their ego's in the way. You know, you have to be willing to lose in front of people. You have to be willing to queue with someone better than you and get outplayed. You have to be okay getting told, yo, that was a bad challenge. You know, you have to be okay saying, yeah, I messed up. That's how you learn. And that's how you win in life. So let's talk about something that scares people more than losing, looking like a beginner. And truth is, it's the most underrated skill in Rocket League, you know, being willing to look bad while you're learning. Most people think the path to SSL is just a clean road of ranked games where you steadily climb. It's not linear, you know, it's messy, and you're going to double commit. You're going to miss open nets. You're going to get flamed by teammates. That's the process. But here's the kicker. Everyone wants the results, but they don't want the process. They actually get them there. And every single player I've coached who has made it to at least Grand Champ or even SSL has gone through a phase where they looked worse before they looked better. You know, you start implementing better decisions, better rotations, smarter plays, and you lose anyways. Why? Because you're not fast enough yet. You know, you're doing the right stuff, but your hands haven't caught up to your brain. But if you stick with it, you know, your mechanics eventually align with your decision making, and then you skyrocket. But most people never make it past that uncomfortable middle. You know, they switch back to what feels good instead of what works. They start reverting to bad habits that got them stuck in the first place, all because they didn't want to feel bad or look like a noob. But I'll tell you this, looking dumb is temporarily the cost of long-term dominance. The longer you avoid that phase, the longer you stay hard stuck. And here's something else that holds people back: avoiding risk. You know, if you want to take control of the game, if you want to hit the rank you keep tweeting about, you're going to have to take some risks. And I don't mean risky challenges, I mean putting your ego on the line, playing with better players who might make you feel behind, paying for coaching and hearing feedback you weren't ready for, queuing even when your confidence is low. That's what it takes, and you don't grow when you're comfortable. You grow when you're stretched. And every time you avoid that, every time you convince yourself, I'll do it later, or I just need to grind more, you're inherently delaying the version of yourself that could already be there if you just leaned in. Let me give you a personal example that just happened. When I lost over 200 MMR for about a week, I was doing everything right, you know, rotating back post, taking small pads, playing safe, and I was losing game after game after game. And for a while, I started slipping into that classic trap, you know, blaming teammates. I'm doing everything right, but my teammates suck. Then I stopped and I looked at the replays and I realized I was the problem. I was doing the textbook stuff, but I wasn't doing the impactful stuff. I was rotating, sure, but I wasn't positioning aggressively enough to create pressure. I was being so afraid of making a mistake that I wasn't making any plays at all. And I realized that playing correctly doesn't matter if you're not playing effectively. So I changed. I took more risks. I started challenging sooner. I played more confidently. I made more mistakes, yes, but I started winning more games because confidence beats caution when it's backed by intention. That's a mindset shift most people never make. You know, they play scared, and they wonder why their progress feels so slow. So just ask yourself, are you avoiding losses or are you chasing wins? That shift, just that one question, can and did completely change how I approach the game. And not just this game, honestly, life too. Because nobody remembers how safe you played. They remember if you won. They remember if you climbed. And most importantly, you remember if you gave it everything or if you just tried to protect your pride. Now let's bring this all full circle. Why does this really matter, Dice? Well, because at the end of the day, the only thing people remember is who ranked up. That's it. Nobody's scrolling through your Rocket League tracker to check how many games you lost before you hit GC. Nobody's counting how many hours you spent in free play. All they see is the rank, the result, the win. So here's the framework that helped me and, the players we've coached in my program through their lowest points. And it starts with this. When something bad happens in ranked, maybe you lose 10 games in a row, maybe you drop an entire rank, ask yourself, what does this actually change about my real life? Does it change how much you know about the game? No. Does it change the food you eat? No. Does it change where you live, who you are, your ability to improve? Absolutely not. It changes nothing except the number on the screen. And you suffering, that's voluntarily. That ego, that's you choosing to believe a narrative like, I'm not improving, or this isn't fair, or should I be higher ranked? But none of that's real. You can choose a different thought. You can say, this is a test. You can say, I'm about to break through. Or even better, you can say, good, more reps, more lessons. Because here's the truth, nobody will invest in you more than you invest in yourself. That's why the players who reach out for help, who join coaching, who rewatch their games, who ask actual questions, those are the ones who make it. Not the ones with 5,000 hours, not the ones with the best mechanics, the ones with humility, the ones with grit. And you might be smart, you might know a lot about the game, but the ones who win are the ones who endure the longest. And that's the hidden skill: persistence, consistency, not giving up just because you had a bad week. Progress is better than pride every single time. And if you still feel stuck, still feel like, you're missing something, maybe you are, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe that's the invitation to finally take the game seriously and get help. And if you've been playing for months or even years and your rank still looks the exact same, maybe you don't need more hours, maybe you need more clarity, because I promise you, the right strategy, the right system, and the right accountability will take you further in 3 weeks than most players move in 3 months. But here's the thing, nobody's going to give that to you. You've got to ask for it. You've got to want it enough to say, I'm tired of doing this on my own. So if this hit home for you, if you're tired of watching hours of YouTube and feeling like you still aren't getting anywhere, then maybe it's time to actually solve the problem instead of just circling it. And if you're ready to, take that step, my coaching program is built exactly for players like you. And we work with dedicated players who are tired of spinning their wheels and finally want real guidance, real results, and real improvement. And we don't just teach you how to rotate, we show you how to think like a top level player. We don't just tell you get better mechanics. We show you what to practice, why it matters, and when to apply it. We build smarter players, not just faster ones. So if that sounds like what you need, head to my website or my Discord server, and you can check out a bunch of different stuff about how my coaching works and everything like that. But fair warning, we don't work with everyone. If you're lazy, if you make excuses, or if you're not ready to change your approach, this isn't for you. But if you're coachable, consistent, and you are serious about leveling up, not just grinding endlessly, then we would love to help you. You only get remembered if you win. So win, and I'll see you on the inside.